Afternoon, all. As Janice mentioned, my name is Nick Miner, and I'm the Senior Manager of Policy and Advocacy here at American Forest. And I am excited to have two Hill speakers. I think, well, I know we have Will. I don't know if Anelia's here yet, but she should be calling in. But Will Layden is the Deputy Staff Director of Outreach for Republicans on the House Natural Resources Committee. And I see Anelia's here as well. Aniela Butler is the Republican Staff Director for the House Natural Resources Subcommittee on National Parks, Forests, and Public Lands. Really excited to have both of you guys here today. And as a piece of housekeeping, if anyone has any questions, can you please just add them in the chat box and I will facilitate after we have a brief introductions from both of them. But with that being said, I want to kick it over to our guests with a just broad question of what does the legislative landscape look like and what opportunities are there for advancing urban forestry priorities?
Will, do you want me to kick it off or do you want to take the first stab at this?
Will just texted me that he was having some tech issues. So I'm thinking maybe you should start.
A likely story. He just wants to put all the pressure on me. No,
There you go.
Well, that's a great question. And before I answer, I just want to say thank you all for inviting me to be here today. It's a great opportunity to talk about this important issue with you all. I think we have Will.
Yeah, hey guys, sorry about that. I've had some connection difficulties here in the house. So Aniela is absolutely the policy expert. I won't even step on it. Keep going, Aniela.
Thanks, Will. So yeah, like I was saying, we're super thankful that you all invited us here today to talk about this. We have the unique distinction of being able to work for a forester. Ranking Member Westerman is a forester by trade, which is great for us because he is just a wealth of knowledge and also pretty intimidating at times when he's asking you what a basal area is and you have to quickly Google it on your phone. So every day is a new learning opportunity when it comes to trees. We're very optimistic about our chances to get some meaningful forestry reform done this Congress. He's introduced his Resilient Federal Forest Act. I think this will be the fourth Congress now that we've pushed that bill. Some provisions have been included in previous bills, but we're looking to, really make a splash on forestry issues this year, especially coming off of another record-breaking wildfire season in 2020, where we had more acres of Forest Service land burned than in any year since 1910. Another big tree project that we're working on is the Trillion Trees Act. So that was his effort last Congress to plant 1 trillion trees globally. That would sequester 205 gigatons of carbon, which is equivalent to 2/3 of all anthropogenic emissions that have been released that are still remaining in the atmosphere. It's also equivalent to all the carbon that's been released through deforestation since 1850. So we really think that this is a great common sense solution that we can push forward that will really help, not only make our forests healthier, but also sequester more carbon on our public lands. And that's going to be a huge focus for Republicans on our committee. As part of that, we're really looking to, beef up the section of that bill that talked about urban forestry to make sure that we can, make sure that we're planting these trees in urban areas. We think that that's really important. I live in an urban area, so does Will, Washington, D.C., so we understand the importance of having green spaces and more trees. There's so much research out there on the benefits that this provides, whether it's from, reducing the heat island effect to, just making people enjoy going outside more. So those are some of the things that we're working on. Will, did I miss anything?
No, you didn't, Aniela. Thank you so much. You guys, hey, hello again, Will Layden. I'm now the Deputy Staff Director for Outreach for the committee. When I talked to you last year, I was with Mr. Westerman's personal office running the Trillion Tree Act, and really appreciated all the feedback you guys provided at our last speaking opportunity. Like Aniela said, incorporating a lot of things on urban forestry. I know actually one of the things that was mentioned last year was the nursery issue and supply of seedlings. That's something that I think that we're going to be addressing in this draft. But from a broad perspective, stepping back a little bit, the Trillion Tree Act, the Resilient Federal Forest Act are both two initiatives that fit into Mr. Westerman's broader approach of putting conservatives back into conservation as under his leadership as ranking member of the Natural Resources Committee. One of the things that we're really committed on doing, like the Trillion Trees Act, is figuring out ways that we can address a whole variety of national issues, whether that's carbon and all that other stuff, in a way that creates jobs and helps to develop rural economies. Especially, we're really excited about things like the Trillion Tree Act because through the tax credit component, we actually can help create a domestic marketplace for advanced things like cross-laminated timber or cellulose improved concrete, things that can help both store carbon in buildings while generating American jobs. So whether it's trees, whether it's hydropower, whether it's anything that runs the gamut at the Natural Resources Committee in the Indigenous people space or in the energy and mineral resources space, we're really excited to kind of take that kind of broader approach. And so again, really excited to talk to you guys today a little bit about the things that we're doing, or the things, that Aniela is doing with the subcommittee on national parks, forests, and public lands, but then even in a broader perspective from our entire committee. So I guess it's sort of back and forth. We're happy to talk a little bit more in detail about the bill, about the legislation, or frankly, just answer any questions that you guys have. So Heather, I'll be quiet.
Hey, that's super helpful. Thank you guys both. And before we dive into questions, I think it might be helpful for people on the call, just to answer kind of a broad question of, with this Congress being so closely divided, how active do you anticipate this Congress being? What is the potential for big legislation? Just kind of what do you see the next year plus looking like?
Yeah, that's a really great question, Nick. I think personally that given the Biden administration's focus on green infrastructure development, and frankly, the margins in both the House and the Senate, it's really going to demand a bipartisan approach to a lot of these issues. The Trillion Trees Act last year was a bipartisan initiative. I fully expect with our edits and our reintroduction this year, it's going to be even more so. In order to create long-lasting policy, I think we have to have a broad approach here. And that's something that I think that we're going to be very well positioned to do and to play in. The reality is there's only a 6-seat margin here. There's only a 1-seat margin across the street. So we're going to be really committed again to figuring out pragmatic solutions for the American people. Aniela, any thoughts there?
No, I think you answered it well.
Perfect. Thank you both. Now the questions are coming in. Daniela was wondering about the Climate Corps. There's been a lot of interest, both on the Hill and off about potential CCC type bill. Congressman Neguse and Senator Wyden recently introduced the 21st Century Conservation Climate Corps, but what do you guys see broadly about the potential for a large workforce style bill that really targets reforestation and trees broadly?
So there's absolutely, I think, a place for a conservation corps type program for a reforestation component. It was actually one of the things I think that was included in the Replant Act. The challenge I think that we have is with Mr. Westerman, he likes to have these things, again, be more private oriented. So again, with Trillion Trees, with the overall putting conservatives back in the conservation angle, our hope is that our legislation and our approach is going to empower private industry to go ahead and drive a lot of this reforestation. For instance, the purpose of the tax credit component of the Trillion Trees Act, just as an example, is to create a market for domestic timber. So as a lot of people I'm sure on this call know, if we were to harvest the national forest and harvest our private forests in a way that would be scientifically driven by all of our trained silviculturalists, we'd have a ton of standing timber, just nothing to do and have no home for it. Now, the purpose of the Trillion Tree Act is to provide a sound home for a lot of that stuff through trillion trees and that sort of thing. Through cross-laminated timber and small diameter timber. and in the hopes that that can help, again, reduce the cost to the American taxpayer. So I think Mr. Westerman is a little bit cautious on some of the programs that are kind of big, broad government things, because sometimes they don't work for rural America. Sometimes it's a challenge to implement them nationwide. So again, I think that there's a way that we can do this in a bipartisan manner, but not, dictating that from Washington, it may not be the answer.
One thing that I would just kind of add on to that answer would be one thing that we've looked at, especially in the context of the issue that's happening right now at our nurseries with the seedling shortage, has just been more workforce training. And so we think that there are two components of this. One is kind of just forestry degrees, which Mr. Westerman knows everything about. So having those advanced degrees in forestry and encouraging those, whether that's at land grant universities or HBCUs. So we're looking into programs that could potentially help that. We're also looking into just some more technical training. So for forest technicians, and whether that's through vocational programs or certificates, we think that that should be a big piece of the conversation as well.
Fantastic. Thank you both. And to follow up on the workforce, because I think that is just such a important and just needed topic. Sarah Anderson was asking, are we pitching these, or the potential for pitching these core and workforce style bills in partnership with private and utility sector employers? And I guess just to give a plug for Sarah and American Forests, we recently unveiled the tree core in partnership with CAZO and CISA. And so we're really excited about starting to hire, I think it's 25 tree core workers in 5 cities across the country. But kind of how we partner with private and utility sector employers, is really going to be important.
Yeah, and I think that that kind of touches on what Will was talking about earlier, where, we do want the private sector to play a large role in this. And we think that where appropriate, public-private partnerships can be a huge part of getting the workforce training that we need to ensure that we have, more people with forestry experience, forest technicians out there in the field.
Thank you. So kind of as another broad question, the SUFC, we work a lot on appropriations, and I know, HNRC is not appropriations, but with the end of budget caps this year, the joy of budget caps that everyone loved, how do you see that impacting FY22 budget and the potential for, forest funding?
It's funny that you bring this question up, because I actually just moved over to the committee last month from the Senate Budget Committee. And I told Will when I was hired, yay, I never have to talk about the budget ever again. I get to talk about trees and stuff I like. And I've talked about the budget a lot more than I thought I would in appropriations, but it's an important question. I think, the answer, I don't mean to be evasive here, but we just don't know what a post caps world is going to look like yet. We've had the BCA caps, the Budget Control Act caps, in place since 2011, I believe. So this will be the first time in a while that Congress has had to deal with the post caps world. It will be interesting to see what shakes out of that. We want to make sure that we're balancing the need for proper forest management with proper funding for our forests. So we have the cap adjustment that's in place until, I believe, fiscal year 27 for fire suppression funding. So the answer is, unfortunately, at the moment, wait and see. And if you know an appropriator who can give you a clear answer, please let me know who they are, so I can them as well.
Yeah, and just to follow on to that too, Nick, as Aniela just mentioned there, the caps on the fire suppression funding, and we're coming off of a historically bad fire season. We spent a lot of money putting fires out. I think it would be Mr. Westerman's ideal situation where we are spending a lot of that money in the front end, where we're actually trying to, again, actively manage the forest, prevent us from getting into a historic burn years, year after year after year. The challenge is that that takes a lot of money and that takes a lot of time. And so, again, this goes back to the leveraging the private industry, trying to be able to create markets, make it economically feasible for folks to come in there, thin timber, turn it into some sort of carbon storing product, while also reducing the cost to American taxpayers.
Yeah, thank you both. Shocking. No one knows what's happening with appropriations. It's always a black box. One, I guess, other interesting thing that's been happening last Congress, and I think it's carried over to this Congress, is there's specifically on urban forestry. There is interest and legislation in looking at how we can support urban forestry through kind of new programs. And so you have the Tree Act, you have the Trees Act, which would be Department of Energy, but there's kind of similar opportunity with Department of Transportation or other agencies. I guess what is y'all's thoughts on kind of that approach of supporting urban forestry through new programs and new agencies and kind of just different approaches?
Well, I think that if the Trillion, and Will knows this better than I do, but if the Trillion Trees Act experience taught us anything, it's that to solve these large scale issues, you're going to need a lot of different committees involved. I think that we're maybe at 7 different committees of jurisdiction that have been referred a piece of this bill. So what's one more, when we're adding on potentially another committee for urban forestry? But I think that, some of the bills that you mentioned, we've looked into. We're interested in seeing if those can potentially eventually fit into a trillion trees style bill. I think that the ranking member, as long as it's a good idea that's based in sound policy and sound science, he's very open to it. And so I think that approaching this idea from different avenues and maybe some of the agencies that we haven't worked with in the past could be a really interesting avenue for us to engage in. It's a little hard for us because obviously it's not our committee's jurisdiction, so we have to get, if we decide to go down that avenue, we have to get our friends on those other committees to kind of agree with us. But those are avenues that we're definitely exploring.
Yeah, and just to follow on to that, Mr. Burchett from Tennessee has been a very, very vocal supporter of the Tennessee DOT reforestation thing, which is essentially a program to plant more trees along highways and along medians in the state of Tennessee. And I know that is absolutely a great way to try and store carbon. The challenge, I think that I completely agree with Aniela. What's one more committee of jurisdiction? But one of the challenges I think that we found with a variety of reforestation bills last year was it's not just planting the trees, it's managing the trees, and then it's at the end of their life cycle, turning them into some level of carbon storing product or providing some end use for it. And the one thing I would caveat on that is, while a particular agency might be very good at planting trees along a roadway or whatever, we also have to make sure that they're equipped to do the management. And there are not anybody who's better at doing that than the Forest Service.
Absolutely, yeah, it is a very, very important point. And well, I guess so. One follow-up on that is, the kind of the tree maintenance is a big challenge for cities, and just covering that. That's a major expense, and it's a real hurdle. I guess what are your thoughts on what would be a way to tackle that? Congress has historically been hesitant to support kind of the operations and maintenance funding in different programs, but how do we help tackle that issue?
Well, I would think the first reaction would probably be private industry, but obviously know that that's not necessarily economically feasible in individual states and localities. So again, public-private partnerships are, I think, an absolute avenue there. Aniela, any thoughts?
Yeah, the only thing that I would mention is that we've actually looked into a bunch of different kind of companies or nonprofits that are currently working on that. So one that actually has some graduates from the ranking member's alma mater. They started a group called Cambion Carbon, and so they are working kind of on this idea of down trees in urban areas and turning them into more sustainable products. And we think that that's just an example of a private entity that's doing great work that can provide a lot of benefits for jobs in urban areas, and that's a great success that we see. So yeah, piggybacking off of Will, definitely the private sector, but there are some folks doing some great work out there that we're obviously supportive of.
Fantastic. Yes, if you guys have the answer to that, we would love to hear it, because that is something we're still trying to tackle too. All right, well, so kind of stepping back again broadly is, urban forests and just trees are things everyone values. What actions can SUFC and kind of just, urban forestry groups broadly, take where we can support bipartisanship and support, real progress as Congress?
Support the Trillion Trees Act.
Yeah, again, just to piggyback on Aniela, support the Trillion Trees Act, but even more than that, as trained silviculturalists, as trained folks who understand how life cycles work, communicate to folks that it's not just planting trees. It's making sure that they're properly managed, and it's making sure that they're utilized. We hear a lot about old growth, which is great in certain applications, but the reality is trees need to be cut down at some point. Otherwise, they will be burnt. They'll catch on fire. So at a certain level, managing our nation's timber, providing a good end use for it, helping rural economies develop an economy which supports timber, I think will be really important. Something that the boss says all the time is, land finds its highest value. One of the reasons why we still have a deforestation problem in the United States, we have a fragmentation problem in the United States, is because landowners, their land will find the highest value. And so, yes, while we may value forests all here together, that intrinsic value isn't necessarily a financial value yet. And that can be a challenge for a private landowner.
Well, I guess on that note, I think, kind of the education, it's always fun, talking with the non-forester hill staffers who, learned about trees in middle school. But, there's, I guess, the need for education on the forest life cycle and how, the end products are very valuable, the storing of the carbon, the soil and the carbon. What would be the best way to start, raising that education level, so that, more hill staffers are very knowledgeable about the role trees can play?
Well, we can start by supporting the Trillion Trees Act, which has a fourth grader education component that will talk all about the stored carbon in both forest products and the soil. But through the institutions like the Working Forest Caucus, through your own outreach, and to everybody on the call, anytime you are on the Hill talking to staff about these sorts of issues, bring up the science behind it, talk about the embodied carbon there, and then talk about the embodied carbon in the end product, whether that's cross-laminated timber, whether that's again, wood storage, that sort of thing, or the value in active management.
I would just add on to that too. When we talk about the Trillion Trees Act, I think that people sometimes assume we just talk about planting a trillion new trees and then leaving it as it is, and then everything is okay. And what we've been saying all along is that we want to plant a trillion trees, not a trillion matchsticks. So if we just plant them, leave them alone, and let them incinerate, we haven't really done our job well. So I think talking about the management component of that is really important, and just making sure that we're educating folks. That's something actually that we're going to be doing on the floor this week, because we have a wilderness bill coming to the floor that really limits some of the active management that can be done in wilderness areas for forest fire mitigation. There are some areas that are actually designated in the wildland urban interface that we've heard feedback from some of the local communities that they're very concerned that this isn't just going to be a forest health issue, but actually a life and property issue now. So that's just education that we are always trying to do, and whatever help that we can get from some of our outside friends to push that message is really helpful.
Perfect. Thank you both. And so, question from Tom. He asked, how specifically would the Trillion Trees Act improve urban reforestation, forestation, and tree canopy? Particularly given the maintenance challenges and budget constraints for communities most in need.
Aniela, I can let you take that one.
Oh, sure. So I kind of, thanks, Will. So I kind of mentioned this at the beginning of our chat, but we do have a section of the bill now that adds carbon sequestration to the urban forestry program. But I think going forward, that's an area of the bill that we've identified that we want to add more to. So I'm kind of going to throw the question back on you all a little bit. I saw another question in the chat that said, can we serve as a brain trust for you? And the answer is definitively a yes. So we want to get ideas from you all about ways that we can improve the bill to better serve the needs of improving urban forestry. So we have some stuff in there now, but that's an area that we want to beef up in the future.
That is, I think, music to everyone's ears here. We would, love to be helpful. And as Rachel says, we'll follow up on the best way to, how to help support that, and happy to be sounding board, or just provide as much information as possible. Sorry, I'm trying to also, the questions are popping in. So I guess going back, we talked a little bit about, you talked a little bit, and hopefully this isn't a repetitive question, but we talked about the new agencies that within the Trillions Tree Act, such as the Tree Act and the Trees Act, with Department of Energy. But I guess, are there anything you see within HNRC itself really that would be enable us to support urban reforestation? And I think kind of tree nurseries is one way that could support reforestation broadly. But are there opportunities that we should be looking at and trying to support your work within HNRC, specifically with urban forestry?
Yeah, that's a great question. So the jurisdiction of the committee is for the Forest Service public domain, the national forest. So it's a little bit more difficult for us to have exclusive jurisdiction on some of those urban forestry programs, although the Forest Service does have them. I would say that, within our jurisdiction, I do think that supporting the nurseries and seedling capacity issue is just going to be a huge part of this conversation going forward. Will, do you have anything that I'm forgetting?
Yeah, I don't think of forgetting is right. I think that you're right that the jurisdiction thing is a challenge there. One of the things I will bring up is the committee also has jurisdiction of the National Park Service, which has plenty of urban space opportunities, places where you can be supporting reforestation, and not only just reforestation, like forest management in an urban environment. So that's just another thing with 440 some odd Park Service spaces across the country. A lot of that stuff also interlaps with our urban spaces.
Perfect. Yeah, no, absolutely. That all sounds fantastic. And so Erica asked, can you share any insights into the maintenance component of, urban areas in the Trillion Trees Act, support for municipal forestry departments, private sector, skilled and experienced community groups, kind of how can we, include all three?
So there's a specific management component for state and private forestry as well as part of the bill. But again, going back to Anilia's earlier point, I think the feedback, the brain trust thing is something that would be very helpful for us, just as we're trying to, again, beef up this bill, get it ready for the next Congress. And then again, bring these opportunities into the more urban space. Yeah.
Well, perfect. All right, well, I guess, are there any other questions I've missed? I'm happy to open the floor if anyone wants to jump in. Or also, are there any other questions that I haven't answered that either of you, think we should be asking?
I just want to say something quickly to the group, and that's that hopefully you can see my name. I know my first name is spelled really weirdly, but if my email address is actually just my first name, Aniela.Butler, BUTLER, at mail.house.gov. So if we don't get a chance to answer your question, please email me. I'm always happy to talk about trees literally any time of day. So if I don't answer it or don't answer it completely, please just shoot me an email and we can talk about it offline. I'm still happy to answer your questions. I just knew given the chat, I know that there are probably going to be some that we can't get to. So yeah, just feel free to email me.
This is Faith. Representative Welch is about to introduce a bill that would support resistance breeding, biocontrol, and other efforts to restore trees that have been hammered by non-native species. And I hope Mr. Wasserman will take a look at it.
We will do that, Faith.
Well, speaking on the Trillion Trees Act, you know, as you guys have talked about, you guys are working on that and expanding the bill specifically with urban forestry. You know, I guess what is your timeline for, you know, eventual introduction? You know, knowing that you guys are still working on it, and so it might be a moving target.
Yeah, so we have a pretty aggressive timeline for introduction. We want to get that done in the next few months, so Q1, Q2 of the year. We think it's, you know, kind of one of the ranking member's centerpieces of his overall push of putting conservatives back into conservation. So it is a top priority for us. Right now, we're in the phase of talking to folks like y'all to get feedback on it, to see what we should change, add, delete from the bill. So we're still in the process of collating all of that together. And then once we have it, it's about putting pen to paper and then hopefully pushing it out the door with a lot of support. So next few months is timeline.
Super helpful. Well, guys, here's a broad question, and you know, I think, you know, if you guys wanted to pun on this one too, but I think it's very interesting. You know, the White House released their climate EO, well, that's a couple of weeks ago now. It just all blurs together, but there is so much opportunity for trees within that. You know, how do you work, you know, to make you know, federal buildings more energy resilient? How do you support the, you know, different agencies? Can you guys, you know, expand on kind of, you know, the opportunities to, you know, the work, you know, on trees in a bipartisan way, you know, to achieve some of those goals that, you know, the Biden administration has now directed towards?
Yeah, great question, Nick. I think one of the things that we've definitely talked about is, again, creating some level of study or pilot project using carbon storing materials in federal buildings. With all of our federal, especially our Forest Service buildings being very close to some trees, they may be good candidates for cross-laminated timber, especially given their, you know, the properties of that material for fire resistance, that sort of thing. The one thing I will caveat, though, and thing that we are disappointed with the executive order is we have found it has had a little bit of mission creep and has started to impact some of our forest management projects on our national forest. So I want to say that we absolutely want to continue to work on that issue. We want to continue to work on improving the carbon storage capacity of our federal buildings. We, however, don't want to be doing that at the same time while we're preventing carbon storage from happening through good sound management as well.
Yeah, just echoing off of Will, I think that the devil's in the details when it comes to implementation. So there are certainly opportunities for us this Congress to work in a bipartisan manner across the aisle and with the administration, but it just depends on whether those policies that we're talking about now are going to end up being more conservation focused and supporting sound scientific management, or whether they're going to be more preservation focused, which is something that you know, the ranking member has really made an effort to kind of contrast his own views with that stance.
Perfect. That is super helpful. Well, okay. Well, I think, you know, we had a great discussion, and, you know, before, you know, we you know, kind of I guess, you know, give you guys a moment to just have any last comments. You know, I will say that we will send around both your contact information to the group in case they wanted to reach out. But I am sure you will hear from us, you know, early and often, as you invited us to talk about trees, and we love talking about trees all the time. But, you know, guys, any last comments, or, you know, just what you need from us, how we can be helpful? You know, the floor is yours.
Just want to say thank you. Oh,
no, you go, Will.
yeah, I appreciate that, Aniela. Joys of presenting in a virtual environment. Just want to say thank you, guys. Appreciate the opportunity, as we did last year, to speak in front of y'all. Again, like Aniela said, we are an open book. Please don't hesitate to reach out with thoughts, comments, concerns. We want the experts to weigh in on this bill. We want to make sure that this is sound management and sound policy. So please don't hesitate to reach out. We would love your support for the Trillion Trees Act and for the Resilient Federal Forest Act, and even more broadly, this whole notion of bringing America and putting it back into conservation. One of the things we'd really love the support for. So I want to say thank you again, and I'll leave it to Aniela to kind of wrap us up.
Yeah, I just want to echo Will's sentiment. We really appreciate the opportunity to come talk with you all. I'm sorry if we didn't get a chance to answer your question, but I have copied them all into a Word document. So if you email me about them, I'm happy to talk about it. You've given us some great ideas to work with. I just got a new one. Is there a draft to review yet? There isn't a new draft. It's still just the same text that was introduced last Congress for the Trillion Trees Act. So if you have comments that you'd like to send us, just kind of work off of what we introduced last year. But yeah, thank you all in advance. I'm sure this won't be our last conversation. And so we're just excited to get to work with you in the future.
Well, perfect. All right. Well, thank you both so much. It was really, really helpful talking to you. And I will kick it back over to Janice and Heather.